Betty had never fit in at school. She wasn't like the other girls, who wore designer clothes and walked with the confidence of kids born into wealth. Betty's outfits were simple hand-me-downs or things her father could afford from the discount store. While the other students talked about vacations and expensive gifts, Betty stayed quiet. She didn't mind being different, but the others did. The worst of them all was Robinson. He wasn't just popular, he ruled the school. With his father's money and influence, he could do whatever he wanted and no one dared to stop him. Robinson had chosen Betty as his favorite target, and once he did, everyone else followed. "Hey, mechanic's daughter," Robinson sneered one morning as Betty walked past his group. "Tell me, does your dad scrub oil off his hands before he touches his food, or do you both just eat like pigs?" His friends burst into laughter, and Betty felt her face burn, but she kept walking. She had learned that reacting only made things worse. But some days, it was impossible to ignore them. One afternoon, as Betty crossed the schoolyard with her lunch tray, she noticed a group of students whispering and snickering. Something felt off. Before she could react, Robinson stepped in front of her, blocking her path. "Where do you think you're going, Big Betty?" he asked, his voice dripping with mockery. She gripped her tray tighter but said nothing. "I think you need a little reminder of your place," Robinson continued. Before Betty could move, she felt something cold and wet splash all over her. Gasps and laughter erupted around her as the foul smell filled the air. A bucket filled with a disgusting, rotten-smelling liquid had just been dumped over her head. Students pointed and covered their noses, laughing at the sight of her standing there, drenched and humiliated. Betty's stomach twisted. She wanted to disappear. Robinson smirked. "Now you finally smell like where you belong with the trash?" The words cut deeper than she wanted to admit. The laughter echoed in her ears, and for the first time Betty felt her eyes sting with tears she couldn't hold back. But then she thought of her father. He'd worked tirelessly to send her to this school, hoping she'd have a chance at a better future. Would she let these bullies take that from her? Betty took a shaky breath, wiped her face with her sleeve, and slowly lifted her head. "I may not have money," she said, her voice trembling but steady, "but at least I have dignity. And none of you will ever take that from me." Then, without another word, she turned and walked away. Betty had always believed that school was supposed to be a safe place, a place where teachers cared about their students and where fairness mattered. But after everything that had happened, she wasn't sure anymore. The day after Robinson and his friends humiliated her in front of the whole school, Betty walked into the classroom feeling like she was carrying a weight too heavy for her shoulders. She'd barely slept the night before, replaying the moment over and over again, the laughter, the disgusted looks, the cold, sticky liquid dripping down her skin. But the worst part wasn't the bullying itself. It was knowing that no one had stepped in to help her. Maybe, she thought, it was time to speak up. Maybe someone, an adult, a teacher, anybody would finally put an end to this. So after class, Betty gathered every ounce of courage she had and walked straight to Mrs. Matthews, her homeroom teacher. Mrs. Matthews was busy grading papers at her desk, barely looking up as Betty approached. "Excuse me, Mrs. Matthews," Betty said, her voice small but firm. "I need to talk to you about something important." The teacher sighed, setting down her pen. "Yes, Betty? What is it?" Betty hesitated, her heart pounding. "Some students have been bullying me, Robinson and his friends. It's been going on for a while, but yesterday, they went too far. They poured something on me. In front of everyone, they said I don't belong here because my dad is just a mechanic." Mrs. Matthews glanced at her, then back down at her papers. "Betty, I'm sure they were just joking. You know how kids are." Betty felt her stomach drop. She shook her head. "No, Mrs. Matthews, it wasn't a joke. It was cruel. I feel unsafe here. Can you please do something?" The teacher sighed again, this time sounding more annoyed than concerned. "Betty, I have a lot on my plate right now. The best thing you can do is ignore them. Just stay away from Robinson and his friends. I'm sure they'll get bored eventually." Betty stared at her in disbelief. That was it. That was all she had to say. "But Mrs. Matthews, That's enough, Betty," the teacher interrupted, already picking up another paper to grade. "Just focus on your studies, all right?" Betty stood there, frozen, as reality crashed down on her. The one person she had hoped would help had dismissed her like she was nothing. Tears burned in her eyes as she turned and walked out of the classroom, her hope crumbling with every step. No one was going to help her. She was on her own. Betty sat alone in the school library, flipping the pages of a book she wasn't really reading. Her mind was still reeling from everything that had happened, the bullying, the humiliation, the way the school had completely failed her. She had never felt so alone. That's when Robinson walked in. She stiffened as soon as she saw him. He wasn't with his usual group of friends this time. He was alone, and that made her even more nervous. There was something different in the way he moved, something colder. He spotted her immediately and walked straight to her table. Without asking, he pulled out a chair and sat across from her, a smug smile playing on his lips. "You think you're smart, don't you, mechanic's daughter?" he sneered. Betty closed her book and looked up at him, her heart pounding. "What do you want, Robinson?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. He leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "I want you to know something," he said, his tone dripping with bitterness. "This, all of this, the bullying, the humiliation, it's not just because you're poor, it's personal." Betty frowned. "Personal? What are you talking about?" Robinson's smirk widened. "You really don't know, do you?" He let out a short, humorless laugh. "Go home and ask your father about a woman named Bonita. Then you'll understand why I hate you so much." Betty's stomach twisted at the mention of the name. She had never heard it before. But the way Robinson said it, the way his expression darkened it, scared her. "What does my dad have to do with any of this?" she demanded. Robinson's eyes burned with something deeper than just schoolyard cruelty. "Go ask him," he spat. "Ask him what he did to my mother. Then maybe you'll finally realize why I'll never stop until you're gone." With that, he stood up, towering over her for just a second longer before turning on his heel and walking away. Betty sat there frozen, her mind racing. Who was Bonita? What had her father done? Why had Robinson's hatred toward her suddenly felt so much more than just bullying? By the time the final bell rang, Betty could barely concentrate. As soon as she got home, she found her father in the garage, working on a car as usual. She hesitated at the door, watching him for a moment. Then, summoning every ounce of courage she had, she spoke. "Dad," she said, her voice quieter than she meant it to be. Her father looked up and smiled until he saw her face. His smile faded instantly. "What's wrong, Betty?" he asked, setting down his tools. She clutched her bag tightly. "I need to ask you something," she said. Her father nodded. "Of course. What is it?" Betty swallowed hard. "Who is Bonita?" For a split second, her father froze. The color drained from his face, and when he looked at her again, there was something in his eyes she had never seen before. Fear. Betty sat at her desk, gripping the edges of her notebook so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Her conversation with her father the night before still echoed in her mind. Bonita, the woman Robinson's mother had once been, the reason behind all the torment she had endured. She had barely slept, her mind racing with the truth. Robinson wasn't just bullying her because she was poor. He was punishing her for something that had happened long before she was even born. And she had had enough. The classroom was already buzzing when Robinson strolled in, his usual arrogant smirk plastered on his face. He spotted her immediately, and his expression darkened. Betty didn't look away. "Well, well," Robinson said loudly, making sure everyone could hear. "Did you ask your dear old daddy about Bonita?" Laughter rippled through the class as students turned to watch the showdown. Betty felt their stares, felt the tension in the room rise, but this time, something was different. She wasn't afraid. Slowly, she stood up. "Yes, Robinson," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I did ask him. And do you know what he told me?" Robinson's smirk faltered slightly, but he crossed his arms. "Oh, this should be good. Enlighten us, mechanic's daughter." Betty took a step toward him, her eyes locked onto his. "He told me your mother has been bitter for years because she couldn't get over him rejecting her. That's why you hate me, isn't it? Because your mother still cries over a man who never loved her?" Gasps filled the room. Some students covered their mouths, eyes wide in shock. Robinson's smirk was gone. Betty didn't stop. "You think you're hurting me?" she said, her voice rising with each word. "No, Robinson. You're just showing everyone how pathetic your family really is. My father moved on. Your mother didn't. And now you're here picking on me because of her broken heart." The classroom erupted. Laughter, whispers, wide-eyed stares. Robinson's face turned red, not with anger, but with humiliation. Betty wasn't finished. She stepped even closer, lowering her voice just enough so only he could hear. "And if you love running home to tell your mommy everything," she whispered, "ask her this: is your father really your biological father? Or has she been too busy dreaming about mine?" The room exploded. Students howled with laughter. Some banged on their desks, others clapped. Even kids who had never spoken to Betty before grinned in amusement. Robinson stood frozen, his fists clenched so tight his knuckles turned white. His breathing was ragged, his jaw locked. For the first time, he was the one being humiliated. Without another word, he turned and stormed out of the classroom. Betty sat back down, her heart pounding. She could still hear the laughter, feel the eyes of her classmates on her. For the first time, she had stood up for herself. And it felt good. Robinson stormed into his house, slamming the door so hard that the walls seemed to shake. His mother, Bonita, sat on the couch, sipping a glass of wine, her manicured fingers tapping against the glass. She barely flinched at the noise. "What is wrong with you?" she asked, raising an eyebrow as she turned to face him. Robinson threw his bag onto the floor, his face red with anger. "It's that stupid girl, Betty," he shouted. Bonita leaned forward slightly, suddenly interested. "Betty?" she repeated. "What did she do now?" Robinson's fists clenched at his sides. "She humiliated me in front of the whole class. Mom, she said you won't believe what she said. She called you pathetic. She said Dad might not even be my real father. Everyone laughed at me." Bonita's grip on her wine glass tightened. Her perfectly painted nails dug into the glass as her face darkened. "She said what?" she hissed. Robinson ran a frustrated hand through his hair. "She told the whole class that you're still obsessed with her father. That you've been bitter all these years because he rejected you." Bonita's entire body went rigid. For a long moment she didn't say a word, but the fire in her eyes burned hotter than ever. Then, slowly, she stood up, her movements controlled, dangerous. "That miserable girl and her pathetic father think they can insult me," she said, her voice cold and sharp. "They think they can humiliate you." "Humiliate us?" Robinson swallowed hard. "Mom, what are you going to do?" Bonita turned to him, her eyes filled with something dark and calculating. "Don't worry about that, my son," she said smoothly. "You just focus on school. I'll make sure they regret ever crossing us." Robinson hesitated. He had never seen his mother this furious before. It almost scared him, almost. Bonita reached for her phone and dialed a number. When the call connected, her voice was low, controlled but deadly. "I need a favor," she said. "No, not over the phone. Meet me at the usual place, tonight." She ended the call and turned back to Robinson. "Go to your room," she ordered. Robinson hesitated. "Mom." "Go." With one last glance at his mother, Robinson turned and walked upstairs. He wasn't sure what she was planning, but deep down he knew it wouldn't be good. Meanwhile, Bonita poured herself another glass of wine and stared out the window, her mind racing. Betty and her father were about to learn a painful lesson. That night, under the cover of darkness, Bonita met with a group of rough-looking men in an abandoned lot. Their eyes glinted with greed as she handed them an envelope stuffed with cash. "I want you to send a message," she said coldly. One of the men smirked. "What kind of message?" Bonita's lips curled into a slow, wicked smile. "Burn his garage to the ground." The men exchanged glances, then nodded. "Consider it done." As the moon hung high in the night sky, they crept toward the small mechanic shop, cans of gasoline in hand. Within minutes, flames erupted, licking hungrily at the walls, consuming everything in their path. By the time anyone noticed, it was too late. Betty's father walked down the road, his shoulders slumped, his heart heavy. The smell of burnt metal and smoke still clung to his clothes. His garage, his life's work, was gone, reduced to ashes in a single night. He had spent the morning sifting through the wreckage, hoping to salvage something, anything. But there was nothing left. The fire had taken everything. His stomach twisted with worry. How would he rebuild? How would he take care of Betty? Lost in thought, he almost didn't notice the man sitting on the sidewalk up ahead. The stranger looked weary, his clothes tattered, his hands trembling from hunger. As Betty's father approached, the man looked up. "Sir," the man said weakly, "I am sorry to bother you, but I haven't eaten in days. Do you have anything to spare? Even just a little?" Betty's father hesitated. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the last of his money, just enough for a small meal. That was all he had left. He stared at the crumpled bills for a long moment. If he gave it away, there would be nothing left. But something in the man's eyes made his decision for him. Slowly, he extended the money. "Here," he said, "get yourself something to eat." The stranger's eyes widened in surprise. You're giving this to me?" Betty's father nodded. "It's not much, but I know what it's like to struggle." The man took the money with shaky hands, his eyes glistening with gratitude. "Thank you, sir. You don't know how much this means to me." Betty's father gave a small, tired smile and turned to leave. But before he could take a step, the stranger called out, his voice suddenly stronger. "Wait a moment, please." Betty's father turned back, confused. The man stood up, dusting himself off. There was something different about him now. "I'm not as poor as you think," the man said, his expression unreadable. "In fact, I'm not poor at all." Betty's father blinked in confusion. "What?" The stranger reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. Without another word, he handed it over. "Take this," he said, "for your kindness." Betty's father hesitated, then slowly opened the envelope. His breath caught in his throat. Inside was a check for an amount that made his hands shake. This can't be real," he whispered. "Why? Why are you doing this?" The stranger smiled, a hint of sadness in his eyes, "Because I believe in kindness. And today, you proved that even when you had almost nothing, you were willing to help someone else." Betty's father swallowed hard. I don't know how to thank you." The stranger shook his head. "You don't need to. Just promise me one thing." "Anything?" Betty's father said. "When you're back on your feet," the man said softly, "help someone else. Pass it forward." Before Betty's father could respond, a stranger turned and walked away, disappearing into the busy street. Betty's father stood there, staring at the check in his hands, disbelief and gratitude swirling inside him. Tears welled in his eyes as he whispered, "God, really does work in mysterious ways?" Betty could hardly believe what she was hearing. As her father sat at the kitchen table, holding the check with trembling hands, she watched a smile slowly spread across his face, the first real smile she had seen from him since the fire. "Papa, this means we can rebuild," she said, her voice filled with hope. Her father nodded, eyes still locked on the check as if he were afraid it might disappear. "Yes, Betty, we can start again." For the first time in days, the weight in Betty's chest felt lighter. They weren't broken. They weren't defeated. They had been given a second chance. But even as relief filled her heart, one question still burned in her mind. "Papa," she said hesitantly, "who do you think that man was?" Her father looked up, his expression thoughtful. "I don't know, Betty. Maybe he was just a kind stranger. Maybe he was an angel in disguise." He exhaled, shaking his head. "All I know is that God works in ways we don't always understand." Betty nodded slowly, but another thought troubled her. "What about the fire? We still don't know who did it." Her father's expression darkened. "No, we don't. But I have a feeling the truth will come out soon." Betty knew exactly who had ordered the fire, Bonita. And she knew that Robinson had probably known about it too. But for now, she pushed the anger away. They had won not by revenge, but by refusing to be destroyed. The next morning, Betty walked to school with her head held high. She wasn't afraid anymore. Not of Robinson, not of the whispers, not of the teachers who had ignored her. She'd survived everything they had thrown at her. And she was still standing. As she entered the schoolyard, she spotted Robinson near the lockers, talking to his friends. The moment he saw her, his smile faded. Betty didn't look away. She walked past him, her gaze steady. For the first time, he was the one who lowered his eyes first. Betty smiled to herself. Sometimes the best way to defeat your enemies isn't to fight them. It's to show them they can't break you.